This is Research Like a Pro, episode 291, William Henry Kelsey Jr., tradesman and entrepreneur. Welcome to Research Like a Pro, a genealogy podcast about taking your research to the next level, hosted by Nicole Dyer and Diana Elder, accredited genealogist professional. Diana and Nicole are the mother-daughter team at FamilyLocket.com and the authors of Research Like a Pro, a genealogist guide. With Robin Worthland, they also co-authored the companion volume, Research Like a Pro with DNA. Join Diana and Nicole as they discuss how to stay organized, make progress in their research, and solve difficult cases. Let's go! Today's episode is sponsored by newspapers.com, your go-to resource for unlocking the stories of your ancestors. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast, Research Like a Pro.
Hi, Nicole. How are you doing today?
Hi, Mom. I'm doing well. I'm enjoying talking with you and recording podcast episodes.
It's always fun to talk about our research and to talk about genealogy, which is why we do this podcast.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that we are on episode 291, and I was just thinking when we hit 300, we should do something special.
There you go. It's coming fast. Well, what have you been working on?
Well, I just keep thinking about when am I going to have time to work on my portfolio? I'm so excited to work on it and finish it. And I think what I want to do next is kind of like the Dave Ramsey debt snowball, where you focus on the ones that are almost done first to give you that feeling of completion. It was like, okay, I got that one all the way done. Well, the research report and the document work are both of them really close to being done. So whenever I work on my portfolio now, it's usually the KDP. But I think when I finish a couple of the projects I'm doing now and I have time to work on it again, I will finish up those two so that I can feel that, yay, I'm partly done with my portfolio because two of the elements are finished.
That's a great idea. It's giving you some momentum.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever you're excited about it, then you want to work on it more, and you somehow can carve out some time to work on it when you're excited about it. I find if there's a project I'm not super excited about, I find it really easy to procrastinate and do something else instead of that project. So it's always fun to be excited about a project.
Yeah.
Well, let's do our announcements for the day. We have our Airtable Quick Reference Guide available. For all of you who have been hearing us talk about Airtable and you want to give it a try, that's such a good resource for you. We are really excited about our Research Like a Pro webinar series for 2024. We continue to have amazing presentations, and the one coming up for February will be Tuesday, February 20th at 11 a.m. Mountain Time. The title is Identifying Henry Jacob Van's Mother, a 19th Century DNA Case Study, presented by Melanie Witt, qualified genealogist. Melanie is a member of our research team, and I well remember the work that she did on this for one of our clients, and she used a DNA network graph to identify this unknown cluster. So it will be very fascinating to watch that. We have our Research Like a Pro DNA study group that is beginning in February. It's so fun because we look forward to these study groups and then all of a sudden they're here. So if you didn't register this time, we hope that you'll keep it in mind for future study groups and perhaps do the work to get familiar with DNA so you can feel confident in joining us. We also have our e-courses that are available at any time, so you don't have to wait for a study group to do one of our courses. Well, we have our newsletter that will let you know everything that's going on with Family Locket, so we invite you to join that and be able to hear from us each Monday morning about what's going on with blog posts, podcasts, videos, and more. We are so excited to see many of you at Roots Tech. That is coming up very fast on February 29th through March 2nd. And Nicole will be doing 2 workshops, and I will be doing some presentations as well as an online webinar. So for those of you who are watching online, I hope to have some of you there.
Yay. We've been to so many Roots Tech conferences, and each one is so fun and different. Do you remember when it was really focused on business and innovation?
Yes, I do. And they had a whole day of that, I think, where the classes were all about technology and business practices. That was way at the beginning. That was fun, though.
I loved that. That really helped me kind of be prepared for starting Family Locket Genealogist, because when we started Family Locket, it was just a blog. But learning so much at Roots Tech helped me think of ideas for if we did start a business, how it would work, and just learning different business practices and getting ideas for books to read. And then I also loved seeing all the innovative products that came out. And I learned about Transcribus back in, I think, 2018 or 2019, and it wasn't quite ready, but now it's fully functional and can transcribe handwritten text. It's just incredible to see how quickly technology is moving along to make our work as genealogists easier.
Right. It is really fun. Well, one of the things that I remember are all the different people that have started companies where they're going to keep your photos or your stories and they want you to join and put all of your information there. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of them come and go. So I'm very leery now about those because the ones we were excited about back in 2017 didn't make it. We've seen quite a bit come and go, haven't we, with Roots Tech and different companies for genealogy?
Yeah, it's interesting to see entrepreneurs get really excited about a new format or platform for preserving stories. And yeah, they don't always stick around. So that is an interesting challenge for the genealogy niche.
It is, and that's why we really just recommend putting photos and stories on Family Search because they're not going anywhere and it's secure. Don't waste your time on putting your information somewhere that may not stay. I want to use my time wisely.
Yeah, for sure. Well, today we're talking about one of our ancestors on your mother's side, William Henry Kelsey Jr., who lived from 1856 to 1918. And this blog post that you wrote that we're kind of talking from today was part of your 52 ancestors goal from last year. And so you wrote about how William Henry Kelsey was a tradesman and an entrepreneur, and how he tried his hand at many enterprises. And so we'll explore this aspect of his life and see if we can learn more about his life history and his time on earth. So, William Henry Kelsey Jr. actually was written about in a few different histories written by his children, giving fascinating views of his life and his work. So, first he was in the sawmill industry, and then he was in the wholesale fruit and berry business. I don't know very much about those things. I'm excited to learn more.
I think the sawmill industry is probably really big anytime you've got a settlement just beginning because everyone needs to build houses and barns and sheds and fences, and you need a lot of wood. You've got all these trees growing somewhere, and you've got to get those milled down into boards. So I think that's one of the industries that always shoots up at the beginning of any kind of a settlement. And I think it's so interesting, the whole idea of the fruit and berry business. So we'll learn more about that as we go through the scenario.
Well, William Henry Kelsey Jr. was the third child born to William Henry Kelsey Sr. and Harriet Huggett. As the first son, he was named after his father. Born on 31 December 1856 in Lewisham, Kent County, England, William didn't stay in his native land for long. The 1861 census listed him in the household of his father with his two older sisters, Harriet and Ellen. The family had moved from Sussex County, where his sisters were born, to Kent County, where William was born, and then again to Surrey County. William's father, known as Elder Kelsey to church members, traveled southern England as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. One cool thing about him is that he kept diaries of his experiences as a missionary. 1 month after the April 1st, 1861 census enumeration, the family boarded the ship named the Monarch of the Sea. They made their way to Utah Territory and settled in Springville. William's daughter Effie wrote, "Their first home was near Hobble Creek, near 2nd North and 3rd West. The following spring, when their garden was coming up, Hobble Creek overflowed its banks completely, destroying the garden and carrying away seeds that had been brought from England." Oh, I can just imagine. That would be so heartbreaking.
Yeah, that would be very sad because obviously they had brought some special things to this desert from their beautiful home in England and probably couldn't easily replace those.
Yeah. Well, the story continues from Effie. From there, they moved to land west of 4th West and 4th South, the corner where the old fort wall once stood. The adobe walls were made into brick and were used to build their home. Father's mother, Harriet, was well educated and for a while kept a small school. Later, his teacher was Charles Evans. Little formal teaching was had, But it was a home with a lot of books and learning, which gave him an interest in the past as well as present events of the day. He was a very shy boy, keeping much to himself. At the age of 15, his father left him to manage the garden and care for the place. There was always something to be done, and he was a good, strong worker. His father was building a beautiful garden and business of shipping fruit and berries to the railroad camps and mining towns. Well, it's wonderful to have that story from Effie about her father and his experiences. I'm so glad she wrote that down and that family members preserved it. It's so cool.
Yeah, and it makes sense that they had a lot of books in their household because William Sr. wrote his diary while he was a missionary in England. And so we've got that. And his writing is just beautiful. He was known as being a wonderful speaker, and people would come from all over to hear him because he had such a knowledge of history and world events. So I can only imagine in his home that he wanted to pass that on to his children, which is neat because they're out here in Utah and it is kind of the wild, wild west. Utah wasn't so much that as it was in Texas and Oklahoma, but it was still early in the territorial days.
Yes, and so the 1870 census was taken when it was still Utah Territory. At that time, the family was residing in Springville with William Jr., age 13, and all of the household could read and write, which was unusual in much of the United States at this time. But given the literacy of his parents, it was not surprising. I'm sure his mother, Harriet, taught him how to read and write, especially since we know she had a school for a short time. By 1880, William was working as a lumberman and ready to set off on his own.
So let's talk next about his marriage and family. William met and married Selina Beddoes on 23 August 1883, and his daughter Effie wrote, Selina Beddoes, who lived in Salem, came often to help Harriet in her home. Father became interested in her, and they were married in the Salt Lake Endowment House August 23, 1883. They made this trip from Salem to Salt Lake in a covered wagon. Selina's married sister Matilda and her husband John Q. Stone accompanied them. It was a 2-day trip, camping along the way. So that's so fun to imagine them making that trip because now we can drive from Salem to Salt Lake in probably 2.5 hours at the most. And thinking of that taking 2 days, that's how it was. Well, Effie goes on to say, Father tried proving on some ground near Salem Canyon. The first night there, Selina stepped over a rattlesnake and refused to stay longer. Their first home was a small 2-room log cabin in Salem. This is where their first son was born, William Henry, on August 13, 1884. After his birth, they moved to a larger house called the Powell House. Their next move was to Springville, living in a log house a block east of his parents' home. Later, they lived in the back part of the Harrison House. Their second son, Edward Raymond, was born here on November 12, 1886. I was also born in this house on the 7th of February, 1889. It's fun to read about that. Edward Raymond was my grandfather, and I knew Aunt Effie, and she was a character, but it's so fun to have her writing and her stories about the family. I love it. In 1889, William built a beautiful house in the Victorian style for his growing family, and that house still stands in Springville. It's now a historical landmark, and I wrote a blog post about that a few years ago titled Family History Serendipity, Revisiting the House that William H. Kelsey Built. It was so fun to go back into that house. As a little girl, I would go with my mother and my grandfather, and we'd go stay at that house, and Aunt Effie was living there, and we'd stay with her. So I well remembered it. But then when we moved to Utah, it had been sold out of the family, purchased by someone else. And I would drive by and think, oh, I'd love to go inside someday. And it just happened that I was at a wedding reception for a family member and ran into an acquaintance. And when she found out that I had, ancestry there in Springville and told her about the Kelsey family, she said, oh, the Kelsey house. And she knew exactly where it was and gave me the contact information of the person who actually owns the house now. And I contacted her and we went to visit. So it was so fun to get to go inside and take pictures and see how it's been updated a bit and just remember being there as a child.
Such a pretty house. It's just such a neat thing that we can still go see it. And I love this story from Effie and how she chronicles their family's beginnings and the marriage to Selena, and then how everyone was born, also down to her life beginning. And I was also born in this house. It's just neat to think about her sitting and looking back on her family's life and writing this down.
Yeah, it is. And it's neat to see the Victorian style. It's got the gingerbread trim, so very, very intricate white trim and the red brick house. And it was at the time, I'm sure, one of the fanciest houses in the area when you think about it. I mean, it's still really beautiful. Well, let's have a word from our sponsor, newspapers.com. Dive into the newspapers where your family's history unfolds as you search nearly a billion pages in seconds. Newspapers.com offers an unparalleled treasure trove of historical newspapers, providing a window into the past. With papers from the 17th century to today, newspapers.com is the largest online newspaper archive. It's a goldmine for anyone seeking to uncover stories from the past. Whether you're a seasoned genealogist or just starting your journey, newspapers.com makes it easy to search for obituaries, birth announcements, and the everyday stories that shaped your family. It's like having a time machine at your fingertips. And here's the best part, our listeners get an exclusive offer. Use promo code FamilyLocket for a 20% discount on your subscription. That's FamilyLocket at newspapers.com. Sign up today at newspapers.com and embark on a journey of discovery.
Well, probably because William was working as a lumberman in 1880. After his marriage, he began a business in sawmills, taking that knowledge he had gained working as a lumberman. The railroad was being built in Utah County and was in need of railroad ties. When William built his Victorian style home in 1889, his lot was right next to the railroad. Effie wrote, Father became interested in sawmills as there was a need for ties in building the Denver Rio Grande. He had quite a flourishing business. There were 5 different mill sites with good sized camps. One was the Nile Mill, one beyond Price. The one I recall, there was a large cookhouse where the family lived. Many of the men brought their families for the summer. They lived in tents. The logs were dragged to the mill by oxen, put into ties, and then hauled to the nearest railroad by horse. Wow, that's such a good description.
Yeah, and if you've ever seen those big railroad ties, they are really heavy, which is why they had to be hauled by horse. They're thick and heavy. So it's so fun to think about being part of this, opening up the area through the railroad, helping with the building. It's so neat.
Yeah, and Effie has a pretty good memory of what it all was like and how people were living in tents there for the summer. And it just must have been, it's like its own little settlement almost.
And I would imagine that she probably went as a little girl, and that's why she remembered it, because it was fun summer activity to be living there and playing with the other children. I wish she would have talked about it a little bit more, but it's neat to have that much at least.
Yeah, it is. The sawmill venture lasted until 1895 when William's father, William Henry Kelsey Sr., died, and William Jr. sold the sawmills and took over the wholesale fruit and berry business. Effie wrote, At the death of his father in 1895, father sold the mills and took over the wholesale fruit and berry business. He was 38 when Grandpa died. The packing house was moved near his place. He had a large berry garden and orchards of his own, but supplemented the demand by buying from townspeople. This grew into a big business. Peddlers would load their wagons to sell in mining towns. Crates of fruit were expressed by train. A great pride in the excellence of the product. Employment was given to many neighboring young people. It's so great that they were able to grow this business and include a lot of other people and really make it into a thriving enterprise.
That is neat. And the railroad was right there by his house and his garden. So sounds like it was just the perfect setup. And I also love that they gave employment to many neighboring young people. That's so great.
Right? You want to turn your garden into a big enterprise?
Nope.
It takes a lot of effort to employ people and do all of that. He was very enterprising. And I just can't help but think that you got your green thumb from this side of the family.
Very likely because my mother loved it. My grandparents farmed, my grandmother gardened. But I was thinking about the fruit and berry business. And if you've ever picked raspberries or strawberries or any of the berries, that's really labor intensive. So I'm sure those young people were busy picking all the fruit.
Definitely. Yes. Which is what my kids always do when they come to your house. So,
They love
you
it.
know,
It's great
you
fun if you get to eat half of what you pick.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, always the entrepreneur, when southern Idaho was being opened up by the canal system in 1906, William wanted to go to the new country. He homesteaded some land near Filer, Idaho, and the crops were excellent. Effie shared the following. In 1906, the southern part of Idaho was being opened up by canals from the Snake River. Father wanted to go into the new country, so with George Hyde and Pat Ward, they homesteaded on a quarter section near Filer, Idaho. Being new country, the crops were excellent. He had taken some wheat from Diclo. It was quite outstanding, adapted to that climate. He sold it all for seed. Then he had it registered under the name of Diclo, a staple wheat of Idaho. He knew irrigation and was able to contribute to it, and he did well. He grew tired of being alone. Mother did not want to go with him to Idaho, and it had been 3 years, so he sold the land. He then returned to Springville and to farming.
That's funny that Grandma Selena just said, "Nope, I am not going up to Idaho."
I have fun.
I've already done enough homesteading here in Utah. I'm not going to go open up something else. So that kind of cracked me up.
Hmm.
Well, even though William didn't end up living in Idaho, my grandfather, his son, Edward Raymond Kelsey, did. And likely he was influenced by his father's interest. And
Yeah.
Edward actually ended up homesteading land in Declo in Cassia County, Idaho, and lived there his whole life. And I visited that farm every Sunday for all my growing up years. So it was fun for me to learn about this. I had no idea that William Henry Kelsey Jr. had been up there prior to my grandfather homesteading. So that was fun to see
Yeah.
connection.
That's what I was just thinking too. Like, oh, now we know why his son went to Idaho.
Yeah, I always just thought he just packed up and left, but obviously there was a lot going there. And it's true, there's that Snake River that goes right through Burley where I was raised, and so many canals. They just opened up those canals, and instead of being a desert, it became this place for wonderful farming.
Right? And so if Edward Raymond Kelsey was born in 1886, then when they opened up the canals and William Henry Kelsey Jr. went there in 1906, how old was Edward? He was like 20.
Right, right.
So he was, probably involved. He probably went. Who knows? Maybe he didn't, but I'm sure he was very much aware that his dad was able to be super successful there. It sounds like he had an amazing wheat crop.
Yeah, I imagine he probably did ride the train up there at times because this was the time in his life when he was like hobo. Remember, we talked about him before on the podcast. He was a hobo riding the rails, and he worked in the mines down in southern Utah. So this family was very enterprising. And my grandpa really got the same enterprising bug passed down to him because he did so much there in Idaho. He raised sheep. We'll have to talk about him another time, but he was eventually named Grassman of the Year for all of his innovation in growing grass, apparently. I need to research that more. But it's fun to think about these men and their business ventures and what they did and with their lives.
Right. I want to know more. What does Grassman of the Year mean? Is that just a name for farmers? Who knows?
It was a big award, apparently. Well, let's finish up the story with just learning about, the end. According to his youngest son, Fred, William invested in many ventures where he lost money. And so that would be the flip side of being an entrepreneur. You lose some and you win some. But he had apparently several mines and a sugar factory. And Fred wrote, Dad was an entrepreneur. He tried homesteading Salem. One night they stayed overnight. What she thought were mice crawling around in her straw pillow was a rattlesnake rotating.
Oh.
They discovered it in the morning, and of course, that ended the homesteading. The homesteading in Idaho was not successful either. There were partner trouble, and Mother didn't like it, so he sold out. If he would have kept it, he possibly would have been a millionaire. Mother was always the conservative, and Dad the plunger.
That's funny.
So that is really funny. And yeah, I would not have homesteaded either. Mice or rattlesnakes crawling around in the night would be terrible. Would
Oh
not
my
be able to
gosh.
sleep.
Mice crawling around in her pillow was a
Yeah, in my
rattlesnake,
pillow.
actually. Oh
Oh,
gosh.
goodness. Goodness. Well, William Henry Kelsey died fairly young. He died in 1918 at his home in Springville, Utah, and he died of typhoid fever. His son Fred stated a sentence that summed up William's life. Fred said he was an adventurer, a plunger, and an entrepreneur. So that's kind of a fun way to end this podcast, to think about my great-grandfather's life, your great-great-grandfather, and just so fun to think of his example of working hard and just trying new things, not being afraid to try something new. Something failed, he just did something different. So pretty neat character. And his wife, Selena, she is the one that became the Utah pioneer that was celebrated clear into the 1950s. So she outlived him by so many years.
By 50 more years,
Yes.
almost.
Yes. She was like one of the last surviving pioneers, and they would talk about her in the papers. So this is the same couple. He died young, and I mean, he wasn't that young, but
60s.
yeah, he wasn't 99 like Selena. So
I just have to laugh at the word plunger. He would plunge into things. That's
yeah,
funny.
I don't think we use that term quite in the same way anymore. That
Yeah.
was fun.
All right. Well, this has been a great story, and thank you for writing these blog posts so that I can learn more about my ancestors while we talk about them together.
Well, it certainly is fun. I love taking these little snippets from the histories that are written. And I think it's also fun to read the different perspectives of siblings. Effie and Fred were siblings, and it's just fun to hear their interpretations of their parents' lives and their childhood. And don't we see that all the time? We all remember things differently. So it's so fun when you've got more than one person writing about the same events. It's kind
Right.
of just a
Yeah.
comparison.
All right, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening. We hope that something you heard today will help you make progress in your research. If you want to learn more, purchase our books, Research Like a Pro and Research Like a Pro with DNA on Amazon.com and other booksellers. You can also register for our online courses or study groups of the same names. Learn more at familylocket.com/services. To share your progress and ask questions, join our private Facebook group by sending us your book receipt or joining our courses. To get updates in your email inbox each Monday, subscribe to our newsletter at familylocket.com/newsletter. Please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. We read each review and are so thankful for them. We hope you'll start now to research like a pro.